You've been invited to a Q&A with Eco Justice Collaborative, possibly because we introduced a minute asking that the climate crisis and climate justice be made clear and urgent concern and corporate witness for Philadelphia yearly meeting. Since introducing our minute, we heard a concern that we wish to supplant or diffuse the current priority to end racism. We believe instead our concerns and goals are complementary and synergistic. We are clear that our efforts will fail without attention to the crisis facing human relationships and systems. Exploitation in all forms is the problem. When we end the exploitation of environmental racism and racism in general, we begin to heal ourselves and restore the earth. All of us need to be partners in this work. The earth and the creatures on it are not disposable, and we believe that friends can reach a deeper understanding of this truth when they can be in connection with the light. Another concern we've heard is that our minute does not identify a single goal or particular project for the yearly meeting to engage. This was not an accidental omission. The climate crisis is multifaceted, and there is no single project or approach that will suffice to address it. Nor is there a single project that will even interest all monthly meetings. Consequently, EcoJustice wishes to use a systems approach to its work to support and coordinate many kinds of projects and actions by different meetings. Our goal is to see intentional and integrated work within the yearly meeting, and we would like to help. We call on the yearly meeting to act on this urgent concern because in the past, though our actions sometimes have not been admirable, when we work together on a matter of truth, our impact is often proportionally greater than our numbers would predict. There are several ways you can connect with us. One of the documents you received, the PowerPoint presentation, has links to most of our work, including our newsletters and webinars. My contact information is on the EcoJustice website. As you can see in the presentation, our work takes the form of education, networking, and support, friends leading by example, or advocacy. The foundations of our work have been attention to our spiritual grounding, working within and through the yearly meeting, understanding based on science, attention to the idea that income inequality, racism, and climate disruption are connected. And we work to promote promising initiatives and climate warming solutions moving forward. We will collect any unanswered questions and email our best answers to you after this program. Thank you. And now, Olivia, would you like to do a tech review?
Sure, I would be happy to. Good evening, and my name is Olivia Brangen. I am a member of Wrightstown Meeting, and I serve the yearly meeting as the Community Engagement Coordinator. I just wanted to review very briefly some things that we'll be using, the technology pieces that we'll be using. The first thing that I would like to talk about is that this call, since we broke worship, is being recorded. And if you are uncomfortable with being recorded, please turn your video off. On most screens, you can find that little video icon at the bottom of your screen, and just click that and you'll turn the video off. The second thing is we ask that you remain on mute when you are not speaking. And then most of us know by now how to mute and unmute the microphone. On most screens, you will find the microphone icon on the bottom left-hand corner. And if you're calling in by phone, please dial *6 and that will take you off of mute. Just to explain how we're going to use the chat this evening, the chat is to For tech support, if you're having a problem, we will do our best to help you. Please use the chat, which is found on most screens at the bottom, and connect with someone with the word staff in their name. TJ there's many staff here, but people supporting tech are myself and TJ, and he has the staff in front of his name. And you can find that in the participants. If you go to the participants, you can find TJ's name there too, as well as mine. The chat will be used only for tech support, pastoral care support, and for panelist questions. Pat will facilitate the conversation, and questions will be put in the chat during that time. We have closed captioning on this call, and so you can find that mostly at the bottom of your screen. You will see a little caret arrow next to the live transcript, and just click on that and you can get the transcription details if you would like to receive them. Let's see, if you need to change your name, you go to either the participants list on the bottom of your screen, and you will be able to find your name, and you scroll over and you can you can change your name in that way, or click on the 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner of your screen to do that. And this evening, Pat will be facilitating our conversation using the method of the electronic raising of your hand. On some computers, you will find that blue electronic raising your hand in the reactions column, in the reactions icon, mostly at the bottom of your screen. I know on my computer, I can find that if you go to the participants column and you find your name and you bring your cursor over, that will give you the choice to raise your electronic hand, and Pat will be able to call on you. And if all else fails, please raise your human hand and I will be on the lookout for that too. Let's see, just a couple more things. To raise your electronic blue hand, if you're calling in on the phone, please dial *9 and that will raise your hands on your Zoom square. And then the very last thing, TJ, if you could move to the next screen. If you're seeking help with tech support or pastoral care support, please connect with us in the following ways. You can chat with us directly in the chat function at the bottom of your screen. You may email, there is someone monitoring our sessions at pym.org email, or you can call the helpline at 717-340-2055. TJ, did I forget anything?
No, I think you got it.
Excellent. Okay, Pat, back to you.
Hello again. I'd like to start with extremely brief introductions to the members of the ECHO Justice Collaborative. So I'm going to start by calling their names and having, so you can see who's speaking, who we're talking about. And shortly, TJ will be putting up a brief list of bios on the screen for you to look at. It'll only be up temporarily, so as people are introducing themselves, please check that out. TJ, can you? Thank you. All right. I'm going to ask you to say your name and your meeting. Bruce Birchard.
Bruce, you have to unmute yourself.
Bruce, I don't see you.
Hi. Well, I'm here, Bruce Birchard, Central Philadelphia, monthly meeting. My screen says Demi Kurz because it's her device, but I'm really Bruce Birchard.
Bert Dallas. He may not be here. Okay. Ruth Darlington.
Ruth Darlington, Medford monthly meeting.
Ed Dreby,
Ed Dreby, Providence monthly meeting.
Pamela Haynes,
Pamela Haynes, Central Philadelphia monthly meeting.
Paula Klein,
Paula, Westtown monthly meeting.
Steve Locken,
Steve Locken, Old Haverford, monthly meeting.
Margaret Mansfield,
Margaret Mansfield, Providence monthly meeting.
Catherine Metzger,
Catherine Metzger, Willistown Friends, and also Westtown meeting.
O. Is O here? I guess not.
I haven't seen her yet.
Okay, Steve Olszewski is not here because he's expecting a new grandchild any moment. Liz Robinson,
Liz Robinson from Central Philly.
Rita Varley,
Rita Varley, Central Philadelphia monthly meeting.
Richard Whiteford,
Richard Whiteford, Downingtown meeting.
welcome all. Okay. Shall we begin the questions? Who would like to start? So EcoJustice has sent you a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, and in it, it has sort of slides of all the work that we've been doing and can do for monthly meetings. So one of them is a list of webinars that we've recorded, and we hope you'll access them because there's some really amazing information and amazing people talking about critical issues of this time. So there's a link to each webinar, and there's a link to register for the next one, which is in April. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about the minute we proposed?
I think David Leonard had his hand up.
Thank you. No, I'm not. I can't find the minute.
Okay. Let me see. Do you want us to share it now?
Well, I assume you're asking us to ask questions about the minute, and I can't ask questions about the minute. It's not in the document in advance didn't include the minute.
No. Let me see.
I mean, if you don't have the minute right at hand, and if that wasn't the way you were going to do it, I'll ask a question about what you said was going to be in the minute.
I can read the minute right now if you like. Would people like to hear the minute?
Yes.
Okay. All right. In 2018, climate scientists told the United Nations that the effects of climate change were occurring much sooner than expected. They warned that unless carbon emissions are cut by 50% in about 10 years, i.e. by 2030, and then to net zero by 2050, humanity will probably experience a global climate catastrophe of incalculable severity before the end of the century. We know that while all will suffer, the most vulnerable populations will face certain calamity. Institutional racism has already harmed communities of color, as manifested in part in environmental injustice. Continued exploitation of the Earth's resources has already caused mass extinctions and put life as we know it at risk. Conflicts due to rising sea levels, food insecurity, water scarcity, and mass migrations are already causing horrific injustice and threatening world peace. For these reasons, our historic testimonies for peace, justice, integrity, and stewardship call us to make climate justice a clear and urgent concern for corporate witness and for all manifestations of our yearly meeting to take immediate and resolute action. Was that helpful?
Yes, can you able to hear me?
Yes.
Then I have a concern that you're not asking us to take specific actions, and that instead it's every meeting should do what it feels specially called to do. And my reason for concern is that I was a part of Britain yearly meeting when we had an entire residential yearly meeting session devoted to climate issues. And we adopted a similar minute where every meeting was called upon to do whatever it thought it could. And as a result, there was Quakers in Britain have a big public presence, but there was no presence whatsoever for that kind of minute. And the meeting, my own meeting, was confused about what it was supposed to do and whether it ended up really not doing anything terribly specific. And it was in great contrast with the yearly meeting, in which the yearly meeting, again in residence, decided that it would facilitate same-sex marriage. And that received very prominent attention in the press. And it was on the morning radio show that morning that we made the decision. I mean, the show that everybody listens to in England. And that was because that was an action that we've been struggling with for so many years, and finally came to unity on it. And the other churches in England hadn't been able to come to unity, and having a simple act like that together attracted a great deal of attention. And I would like to suggest that thinking about even a simple thing that we could all commit ourselves to do, such as, for example, that all the meetings in the yearly meeting would commit to changing their electric power to a source that provided non-carbon based power, that could have a real impact, that we could get picked up in the TV news and could be into the papers. We hear, Quakers, we're being invisible, and this kind of minute will attract no attention whatsoever. And so that I'm suggesting that a simpler, minimal action would at least enable us to present a coherent front and get some attention, which is in the end the only way in which we're going to get real action. It's not what we as individual meetings do, but it's what the society does of which we're a part. So that's my I don't know where we are in the process and whether it's even possible to think about that, but I would urge people, maybe if not this year, maybe next year, to at least think about how we could take a public yearly meeting universal presence on this around this issue.
David, would you like somebody to answer that?
And if you feel called to answer it, please do.
Somebody feel called to answer this particular question? Margaret?
Not an answer, David. But a framework. The purpose of the minute is to enable us to communicate together more effectively so we know what we're doing. There are lots of friends doing all sorts of things, but we don't know what we're doing. We can't learn from what other meetings are doing. We can't support them should we choose to. So in the beginning, perhaps it is just finding out who's doing what and where and in what contexts and what draws us together on this. And some of us will be drawn to policy, public policy, some will be drawn to individual action, and we can find a common ground out of an effective communication system is one. Another is that a minute of this sort would give authority to yearly meeting leaders to speak publicly on the issue, to write op-eds, to join with other faith groups in a public statement on the urgency of addressing climate as a religious concern. And that has a real meaning and value. And a last is to put before people, all of us as friends, how are we called?
Charles Hardy, did you have a question?
I did have a question, though I know that Molly Hicks's hand was up first. Perhaps she should go first.
Molly?
Thank you. Yes, I had it up, but then I lowered it and I raised it again. I'm interested in, well, thank you for this minute. I personally wholeheartedly support it. And I have a question about for the folks for whom the idea of this minute raised concerns about racism as an issue and our work toward anti-racism somehow being supplanted or replaced by this minute. I'm curious as to how those friends have been responded to, because to me, this minute makes abundantly clear the intersectionality of all of these issues and the fact that we indeed will address the need for racial justice when we address climate justice. So I'm wondering if Eco Justice or Yearly Meeting as a whole has replied to those friends and how they've helped them to understand that intersectionality.
I don't know that we've responded formally yet, other than with the comments that came out of the framing statement.
I'll add to that, that in the work that the Eco-Justice Collaborative is doing, there are many opportunities for us to broaden the conversation and ensure that environmental justice is at the core of the climate work that we're doing, and to ensure and to loop other people in to that work. So a lot of this, as you probably know, is very fast moving, and the climate work now is really picking up. So there's a tremendous opportunity for engagement, but you have to bring people in. People are not aware of those opportunities necessarily. So there's a lot of education that needs to be done, and a lot of making sure that people know the opportunity exists for them to speak and to work specifically on environmental justice. So those of us who are working on these issues are constantly bringing people in and attempting to educate as we go, so that we're broadening the conversation and broadening the circle of people who are engaged.
Thank you.
Sure.
Charles?
Thank you. Very grateful for the minute and for the fact that it has, in coming before our meeting, has really given us another moment to wake up and look toward actions. We can keep writing letters and signing things, but within the meeting, we're starting to realize our commitment to do things, change the meeting house in the ways that needs to be changed for the future. That helped with that. But the question, how is the yearly meeting going to be held accountable to this in any fashion? How do we know, and how do we make sure that this thing that calls the yearly meeting to take climate into account in all things does that?
Would anyone like to answer that? Rita?
There is a dimension of this that is right at the core, and it is the deepening our relationship to the Spirit and surrender to the Spirit. And at that level, the accountability is to being faithful to following the Spirit. And I'm finding in my personal life that it's totally inseparable oneness that we are approaching. And it's the adventure of my life to move into that consciousness. There's the radical shift in consciousness that is being called for in this ministry for the climate is at the core. And we're in it part way, and we're experiencing it, but the places we can go are still emerging to our consciousness, and it's just inseparable, and it answers all the questions. When you move into the Spirit, it opens the wisdom of seeing the whole, which is different from working on individual things. And it tells you what to do when you see that vision of the wholeness.
Thank you, Rita. Can I ask either Pamela or Bruce to do further follow-up?
Yeah, I would add that when Central Philadelphia Monthly Meeting considered this minute, what people asked exactly that same question. Well, where is the accountability? And we amended our own minute to suggest that there be an annual report from the clerk of the monthly meeting or the quarterly meeting, the yearly meeting, about how we have progressed in the past year. So an assumption that this would come before the body every year with a report on what has happened thus far.
Thank you. I second that.
Joan Broadfield.
Thanks. I have a couple of questions. And the thing about accountability, I guess that also has come up for me. I would love us to talk as a community about what accountability means. And that's a whole other topic, but maybe this is a means to that discussion. So my question is really about why this minute might be a way into anti-racism and the work as a yearly meeting. Some of the examples I heard made sense and some I'm not so sure of. For instance, I would love to see how we are more engaged as a yearly meeting in some of the actions and statements that come forward. That's not just put into one particular hand for it. So that was one thought. I'm a member of the Energy Co-op because I'm really, really concerned about the development of alternative and green energy in Pennsylvania. So I also live in Chester. My income's not great. Energy Co-op is actually a little more expensive than most. So one of the ways that I'm thinking about the people around me is how can they afford to have more expensive energy? So is there a way that yearly meeting might be able to help in that way? That would be another way of doing both, serving equity and working more green. And that itself is a huge issue about the offering of alternative energy to people. I get mail and people knocking on my door all the time, and my neighbors do as well. I know that there's a lot of stuff that I get and people that are knocking on the door that really don't have a great option. My neighbors don't know that. So how can we help in that regard? I guess that's where I am for now. Thanks.
Let's start with Liz, and then go to Ruth.
So in my previous life, I founded and directed the Energy Coordinating Agency of Philadelphia, which is probably the state's largest nonprofit provider of low-income energy services, principally energy efficiency, and now solar, workforce development, and related home repair, all kinds of services of that sort. So ECA is kind of in the middle of where all this stuff intersects. So it provides 20,000 services to low-income households every year in Philly, and then now also in the entire state of Delaware. So we understand the region really well and know what these problems are. And I would say to you that the price of energy is something that probably a lot of us don't follow every day. You know, you see the price of gasoline, but you don't really see the price of energy. And it would be surprising probably to some of you to learn that the price of solar energy has plummeted in the last 10 years. So it has come down to where it is competitive. It's cheaper than coal and competitive with gas. But that's only if you are acquiring it at scale. So, you know, it's not so just a kind of the long and short of this is that an energy supplier like the co-op does not own the generation. They're purchasing it. They're a middleman and they're purchasing it from someone else. So they're marking it up, of course. So if you are looking to supply low-income people with low-cost solar, for example, you have to address the issue at a different scale. So now that I'm no longer the executive director of ECA, I'm working in solar and working on policy. And I will just tell you that Pennsylvania as a state is woefully behind the curve. So we have a lot of room for improvement on the policy side of things. But I don't want to take us too far down that path, but there are a lot of issues related to climate now that have to be solved at a much larger scale. So they're not at the scale of what you and I can do in our own homes. It's the policy, the public policy side. And for that reason, you know, I firmly believe that Friends have an historic role. We have a historic role and a moral role responsibility in this space at this time in Pennsylvania, particularly. And environmental justice is core, and there are many, many opportunities. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is a huge bucket of opportunity for low-income people statewide if we are doing it right. So one of the things I've been concentrating on is advising the state on how to use the revenue from the carbon market to benefit low-income communities. So there's a tremendous opportunity to really change the change things, you know, really at a scale that we've never seen before, and the time to engage in that change is now. So that's why we're trying to do a lot of education.
Thanks, Liz.
Sure.
Several people who would like to comment, starting with Ruth, then Paula, then Bruce Burchard.
Actually, I just wanted to let you know that Paula had asked in the chat to comment and that there was a question about Reggie.
We'll deal with Reggie after we finish. Let's start with Paula and then Bruce Burchard.
I wanted to reflect on both the question on accountability and also on the initial response or question about wouldn't it be more sensible to have a very concrete ask that we can unite around and have a bigger impact, create wider ripples through the both religious community potentially and the broader community as a whole. And I have two thoughts that I'd like to share. One is a very commonplace one that we're all familiar with. When it's everybody's job, gosh darn it, it turns out it's nobody's job. So that the idea that the minute would be complete by simply saying that we call on everyone to prioritize, I can't quote the exact language, but to put it front and center, it definitely would not be enough. And I appreciate what another friend shared, which is this concept of there would be a discernment each year at annual sessions to say, this year, what is the next step for us? And the us needs to be understood in my mind. The us needs to be understood as a yearly meeting. Where can we have the most impact, the greatest impact this year as a yearly meeting in Delaware and Jersey? So that's one piece, is to say, I think the minute needs to be presented and understood as a commitment to a series of annual reflections that both commit us at the yearly meeting level to speak out, to be visible, to be testifying, to be witnesses, but also at the monthly and quarterly meeting, which means in my mind that the yearly meeting needs to put resources to support our meetings to take the actions they need to. And we have resources, but we don't necessarily leverage them or stick with this as a priority. We have things to help our individual meetings, many of which are historic. They may be the last to transition in some sense, but we can be responsible and make sure we've understood that. I think we could also, as got lifted up, we could all agree, and many of us have already made this decision to only purchase renewable energy credits right now, because that seems like one way to vote with our dollars and make a clear statement. But we could do that in a way that helps the meetings that might need some support in that transition, both technically, but also maybe even financially if there's a little bit of a challenge there. So that's my first piece. Is I think we're all united that it won't be enough to say, make it a priority, but it needs to be built into then the practice of the yearly meetings, processes, quarterly meeting, and a monthly meeting to make sure it stays centered. And the other point I wanted to make was about accountability. Many of us are old enough to have participated in a conversation like this at the turn of the century. Isn't that funny? We can say that, turn of the century. It's been 20 years now. in which there was more specificity, but it was a full-hearted, full-throated commitment to making this a high priority. And we lost steam. And it was very general. So this is an echo to the concern mentioned at the very beginning. So I think we need to be vigilant about and honest with ourselves about how much work this is emotionally, spiritually, and in some cases financially and technically. We have, thank goodness, people like Liz and others among us who have the technical background to support us in understanding this. But when you're really in, as with the anti-racism work, when you're in a situation that's so desperate, it's not always clear where to start first. And so having the vision and the commitment to hold ourselves accountable in very concrete ways will be essential. I just wanted to validate both of the things that were said, and that without those follow through commitments, then we won't see what we all need to see in such a critical decade that we're all living in. Thanks.
Not to mention, you were heading a project called 100 for 100, or Ready for 100. And then within the yearly meeting, it was 100 for 100, 100% renewable. Bruce, you've been so patient.
Oh, I'm patient.
Yeah.
I want to say a couple things about eco-justice, environmental racism. And so one thing is just to note that whether we're looking within our own community, Philadelphia, where a good example is when the refinery in Southwest Philadelphia blew up and spewed toxic chemicals and so on. The communities that were most directly affected were communities, largely people of color, definitely including large numbers of African American people. And actually one of our Eco-Justice Committee members, who's a member of Central Philadelphia Meeting, has been doing a lot of work there, even before she came to the Eco-Justice Collaborative. Or, we all know about the 9th Ward in New Orleans during the hurricane. We could go on and on. And internationally, I just want to note too that you look at the areas around the Sahara Desert, the Sahel, which are drying up and where the heat is becoming horrific. Those are African people. You look at South Asia, heat is becoming a huge problem. Experts expect that in the next decade or so, heat levels are expected to get to the point where people can't survive. I mean, in a matter of hours or days, it could get so hot that people will just die. And or in a country like Bangladesh, where I think nearly half the country is less than a meter above sea level. You can see what rising seas are going to do. An awful lot of us, most of us Quakers, are pretty privileged people. We'll be able to protect ourselves. We have air conditioning. We're mobile. We can move if we need to. Anyway, you get the picture. The other thing I want to say really specifically is that another tie-in here is the issue of jobs. Right now in Pennsylvania, some of us are working on two particular issues. One of them, Liz mentioned, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which would would basically reduce carbon dioxide levels or greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere by a certain amount each year, and also generate considerable amounts of money each year through the sale of permits to through basically a cap and trade program. And those would be used to help expand solar and wind energy in particular. The estimates are that within the next 10 years, that would probably mean about 27,000 new jobs. And an awful lot of those jobs are basically construction jobs and maintenance and operations. These are jobs that, you know, many of them do not require a college degree, but they pay well. Awful lot of them would be union jobs. That's really important. And the other thing we're working on is something called the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standards, which would require that within the state of Pennsylvania, a certain proportion that would need to be power generated from renewable sources. And again, this would create a lot of jobs. You know, the economic modeling that's been done of this would probably create about 100,000 new jobs in the next 10 years. And those are jobs, you know, there'd be some of them that require advanced degrees and a lot of training, but an awful lot of them would be jobs that are that would really help a lot of people who are struggling to find decent employment. You know, who are struggling because the only jobs they can find are, you know, working at McDonald's or in Amazon warehouses or something. So those are the things I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Carolyn McCoy, you had some question about Reggie.
I partly have a question about Reggie, but I have some other comments as well. I think in the minute there was something talked about, there was a need for clear and immediate actions, and there's a need for corporate witness. I agree, but I found the minute to be very sorely lacking in any particular substance or even recommendations. I would find those to be really helpful in a couple of ways. I think recommendations for what kinds of advocacy could be done and how friends, kind of like FCNL only on the state level or state levels, because we're not all from Pennsylvania. Like, if you're going to be taking action in terms of legislation, these are the things you should do. These are the people you should write to. These are the points you should make. These are the legislative priorities you should support. I can envision that in the role of advocacy. I think another way in which the Eco-Justice Committee could be really helpful is finances. There are a lot of banks that have pretty terrible financial policies. What recommendations would the Eco-Justice Committee make about where our meetings and our yearly meetings should be investing our money? Those are ways in which we can act corporately much more than individually. I've been frustrated for a very long time about how little I can do as an individual. I think we are much stronger, we're more powerful when we work as a body. I I did have particular questions about Reggie and kind of where are we in that process? Has it been passed? Is there still a need for advocacy about that? Like, where are we in that process? It's more of a technical question, but I'd like to know kind of what the status of that is.
Let me start with asking Ruth to respond with our communications about advocacy, and Pamela can respond about banking. Maybe Pamela and Steve Locken, and Liz Robinson will respond about Reggie. Ruth, do you want to tell how we communicate advocacy through the newsletter?
Sure. We do put out a monthly newsletter, and the first thing in it usually is requests for action. And those requests can come from anybody. Generally, they've been coming from people within the Eco Justice Collaborative who have been working, for example, to get Reggie adopted in Pennsylvania. But there are a number of issues that we have put forward, and we do that every month. There is some request for action. And I just want to say too, in general, that a commitment at the yearly meeting level is a commitment to put the yearly meeting resources, make them available, whether it's staff, whether it's money, whether it's ability to communicate, committing those and a considerable portion of those where they will help us do our job, but where they will also help monthly meetings do whatever particular part of the solution they've committed to. But as for advocacy, I think that's all you wanted me to say right now, right?
Well, I'll let Liz talk about the advocacy and Reggie shortly. Pamela, do you want to talk about banking?
What Carolyn was talking about was particularly around where our money is.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a powerful thing to look at. It looks to me as if our yearly meeting is steadily moving toward an agreement or an understanding that we need to put thought into where our money is. And we've traditionally been good at negative screens where we don't want things to go, but we may want to look at, banks that are really terrible around energy, like supporting fossil fuel extraction, for example. We can also, I think that there's an appetite for looking at putting our investments into positive things. And that is easily could be things like renewable energy portfolios. So I think that I think you're absolutely right, Carolyn, that there's a lot of opportunity for us to look at our at where our yearly meeting and our monthly meetings have their money, and be more even more decisive in the decisions that we make. And I know that we've played a big role in pushing Friends Fiduciary to move in that direction, and they continue to move in that direction, and we can continue to play a role with them, but we can also think independently as PYM about our financial resources. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity there to act corporately.
Liz, do you want to answer?
Sure. So the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, for those of you who don't know the background, it's the nation's oldest and largest carbon market. And it encompasses every state from Maine to Virginia, except for Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania being a fossil fuel producing state, when we participate in RGGI, we will double the amount of carbon that is currently under a cap, because Pennsylvania by itself produces more carbon than all the other RGGI states combined. So it's very, very important for Pennsylvania to join. And as Bruce mentioned, RGGI caps carbon and then lowers the cap every year, requiring every electricity generator who generates carbon in the process of making electricity to purchase an allowance for every ton of carbon that they emit every year. And that purchase price is very cheap, but because we have so much carbon, it'll generate a lot of money. So RGGI will generate about $300 to $400 million every year for the first 4 or 5 years, and then it begins to decline because emissions decline. So to Carolyn's question, where we are is the public comment period in December is over. Many, many Quakers did testify, and we had over 40,000 supportive comments written in during that period of time. So hundreds of people testified. We had 95% of those who testified were in support of RGGI, and then we got 40,000 plus people who wrote supportive comments. So the public comment has been overwhelmingly supportive. Not to be partisan here, but the Republicans in Harrisburg are attempting to block RGGI by passing legislation, which, to be frank, is absurd. The legislation would prohibit any new regulation on any subject from ever being made in Pennsylvania. So it presumes that somehow Pennsylvania has arrived at the perfect number of regulations. And if anyone dares to bring forward a new regulation, they must identify an old regulation which is no longer needed, and that old regulation has to come out. So you can only get a new regulation if you pull an old regulation out. So it's just some absurd notion. But anyway, this kind of bill, this bill is moving into position for a vote in both the House and the Senate. And we are working to make sure that when the governor vetoes the bill, these bills will probably pass, but when the governor vetoes them, they will not be overridden. So the goal is to prevent an override. That process is underway now. So the legislature does have the ability to gum up the works if these bills pass with a supermajority. And we're working very hard to make sure they do not. If we succeed in that process, then the bill moves along through, there's one more sticky wicket, which is called IRC, which is the Independent Regulatory Review Commission. That body can gum up the works a bit. So we still have these 2 hurdles to go through. But if we clear those, then RGGI goes into position in January of next year. And the first auction is held 3 months later. So revenues begin moving into the state's coffers. All of this revenue comes back to Pennsylvania, and it comes by law, it comes into something called the Clean Air Fund. And it must be used, this revenue must be used to improve our air. So how do you do that? You do that by accelerating the transition to clean energy, principally through energy efficiency, then through solar and wind and clean biomass, carbon sequestration in soil. For those of you who love organic food and love to see the earth come back, regenerative agriculture is a really very important strategy in RGGI. But this is where the environmental justice side comes in. The state of Pennsylvania now is convinced that 1/3 of these revenues must be spent on environmental justice communities. And it's that opportunity which is really huge. And the other thing, you folks who are not in the weeds, I've been in the weeds my entire life, but anyway, for those who are not in the weeds, the beautiful thing about RGGI is it does not have strings attached. So when you get federal money, It has all kinds of, strings attached to it, which you have to adhere to. But Reggie's different. Reggie has no rules, no preset rules. So the state of Pennsylvania can define the priorities and define the solutions and use this revenue to solve real problems that we have in the state. So it's an extraordinary opportunity for the state, which is why we urge all of you to help. Sorry, I can't restrain myself.
I want to go on quickly to Jackie. She's been waiting a while.
I think the minute is wonderful. It says what's in my heart. And I also think Carolyn had some really good points about needing a focus. We're working in our meeting on some things, and it's slow going. And I think there are other ways we could work more effectively. Like, I would like to know more about where to put money and where the meeting can put money. And I think that's one focus that could be lifted up. And I think also the policy thing, that all of that is very confusing to me. So if we had maybe 3 or 5 actions that everybody in PYM could take, that would be clear directives that, these would be things that would be most important to work on for this year. And then we write a spiritual state of the meeting. Why wouldn't, our meeting also put out an annual state of the meeting as far as our environmental justice initiatives, what we've done, what our goals were, where we are in the process, so that report could come back to PYM in the yearly meeting. That's mostly what I had to say, that it would be helpful to have more of a focus each year and then a report back, so you'd know where we are.
This is the point where we talk about next steps. And I realize that everyone should have received the Eco Justice presentation, PowerPoint presentation. And in that is a list of webinars, links to them. And one of them is green investing. You might, Jackie, you might find that interesting and helpful for investments. It's a very clear and helpful guide. And most of our webinars are very clear and helpful in terms of different processes, green investment, Reggie, there's a lot of information in there that you might want to tap into. So we will be sending out a newsletter in April in which we will put in the information that people are asking for in the chat. We will explain Reggie, and we will identify the bad bill. Somebody asked for the bad bill. And I think, Bruce, did you want to say something before you have your?
Well, maybe very briefly, I was going to mention the webinar that we did on investing. I mean, we can certainly put people in touch. We had 3 speakers who were all very knowledgeable about different aspects of that. As far as Reggie, if you're in Pennsylvania, I mean, that's where this battle's going on. We want our representatives and state senators to vote against Senate Bill 119 and House Bill 637. Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. Senate Bill 119 and House Bill 637. Those are the bills that would prevent, for instance, the Department of Environmental Protection from introducing any more regulations. So, thank you.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, some of the webinars we have are the connection between immigration and climate change, Reggie, climate justice work of 5 monthly meetings gathered to talk about their work. We have green investing and why the crisis we face make financial reform necessary. So our next one is in April 19th, and I hope you'll join us. There's a registration link on that page. So
Pat,
yes,
you want to give the topic of that April 19th webinar, which is taking action locally for clean energy in our communities?
well, I think you did.
Right.
The exact title is A Clean Energy Future, How We Get There at the Local Level. So that would cover a lot of the things that were asked this evening. Thank you again for joining us. And I really hope you will reach out to us. We really want to hear from you, and we would like you to join us, participate with us, or give us your ideas about what you want from us. We will be talking more about this on Saturday. Thank you.